So, hello everyone. My name is Colin Cordner, and I'm a visiting scholar at the Department of Greek and Roman Studies, as well as a meditation guide. I've been practicing for a number of years, in one capacity or another. And this particular week, this particular meeting of the Young Meditators group, I was planning to actually lead us through a guided meditation on what traditionally is called Maitri or metta practice. Maitri is a Sanskrit word. Metta is the Pali term. So if you look up any of them on the internet, you'll find dozens, hundreds, if not thousands of pages, both traditional and non-traditional, will pop up describing the term and describing different practices. And so just to give a little context before we go into like a very long talk or anything, it's just to say that probably the best translation to English of the word Maitri is friendliness or loving kindness. And this practice is for many generations been considered quite important in the Buddhist tradition, just for the reason that it's really by developing loving kindness that one begins to settle in with oneself, to settle in with the world, and begin working with one's own mind and emotions in a fashion which is conducive to really being gentle with oneself and merciful to others. And it's very conducive to actually becoming less fixated upon remaking oneself in some image which we've either acquired through habit or through socialization or through some like hidden neuroses of one sort or another. And so for about 2,500 years, this has been like a very mainstream practice within Buddhist and then later on in Hindu traditions as well. And so I thought it would be quite useful to actually give some sort of contextualized introduction to this practice in this particular week, just so people can actually learn what it's like to actually work with some of the more difficult emotions or experiences in a way which is not tinged with some sense of aggression or rejection, which is often part of our experiences, that we have certain experiences that we like or that we're taught are good or taught are exceptional or taught that we should hang on to. And all the other experiences of human life, we have majority of them really, which we're usually taught to suppress, push away, withhold from ourselves, not address in some way, shape, or form. And oftentimes, even in the secular mindfulness movement and in certain sort of like mainstream Western ideas of meditation, that's usually that idea that there's certain things you should be cultivating and certain things which you should be like burying in the closet someplace is very strongly present in our society, in our understanding of how to work with our minds and how to work with our emotions. And what's interesting from this perspective is that that's actually not the teaching. The teaching is actually that one can actually extend friendliness to even some quite difficult things, and that it's actually much more conducive to one's own growth, to one's own well-being and health, and one's own relationships with the world, to actually open up in a wise but present way with whatever is actually going on. So I guess that's actually the preamble. That was a long preamble, wasn't it? About five or 6 minutes. But that was a lot of words, but nevertheless, we'll persevere. And what we'll probably do now for just a few minutes to let our minds sort of like settle in a little bit is actually do a little bit of mindfulness or shamatha practice. And just to give the Cliff Notes version of what we talked about in previous weeks, shamatha practice, or really, calmly abiding practice, to be more literal in the translation, is basically not about trying to make your thoughts stop so much as allowing oneself to have an anchor which allows you to sort of like just relax. It's really just about like your mind just relax into your body, into your present experience, and whatever's going on by just like continuously just like bringing yourself back to the ground. And that's really all there is to it in terms of theory. Practice is a little bit more difficult, but that's pretty much all there is to it in theory. And so we'll just do that for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, just to really let ourselves like just be here, to be doing what we're doing, which is just really sitting and being with ourselves. So just to remind ourselves of our basic way of getting into this is we really take the approach of summoning up some sense of like curiosity and welcoming into our experience. I often like to think of myself or to bring up that sense of welcoming by briefly flashing on the idea of being the innkeeper of like an inn at a hot spring. Somebody simply invites people in, whomever they are, just to relax, to be themselves, whatever state they happen to be in, whether they're in a hurry, whether they're being a bit slothful, agitated, or calm, just welcoming everybody equally. And just extending that sense of welcome to our actual present experience, whatever it happens to be, without judgment, without grasping. In terms of our sitting posture, take a comfortable but dignified posture, something that expresses that sense of being a dignified monarch sitting on their throne, attentive and aware. Having a strong back and a soft front, but relaxed and confident, unforced. And as we settle in with that, just bring our attention to our bodies. As we just wait and rest attentively in the present moment. Just noticing the body breathing. Noticing that we don't have to do anything to the breath or with the breath. We just let our minds rest with it, with the natural experience. Our gaze is soft. Slanted towards the ground. And as we breathe, just being with the breath, just noticing how much comes up, how much is present in our minds and bodies. Just continuing to breathe, that sense of welcome to all that. And relaxing out. Just always coming back to the feeling of the body breathing. And we'll do that for about 5 minutes. When you notice that your mind has wandered off, good. That means your awareness is strengthening. You can just return to your anchor, the body and its breathing. Unfabricated feeling, just being alive. Let's see. Come now to the end of our brief shamatha practice. We can end with just a brief sense of appreciation into our bodies, into our minds, to our situation, that we could actually take these few moments to our past selves for getting us to the cushion so we could practice for a few minutes and be human. We can stretch our legs a bit, and I'll give a brief talk about our next practice. We'll be doing it about 10 or 15 minutes, depending on if I keep track of my talking versus my timing. So yes, as I mentioned before, the practice we're going to be working with a bit today is called Maitri, Maitri Practice, or Maitri Bhavana in Sanskrit, which can be translated as either cultivating loving kindness or being loving kindness. It's one of those interesting Sanskrit terms which has multiple connotations. And those connotations usually point to the fact that there's usually deeper and deeper layers to which one can go with the practice. So usually, especially with Buddhist practices which seem extraordinarily simple-minded, the depth of subtlety which you can go into them can actually take you quite far. We're not going to get too overboard with it, even though I'm a bit of a scholar and a nerd. I'm not going to get into the sort of depths which we can go to with this practice, except to sort of give a bit of framework to what we're doing and why we're doing it. Not just like psychological framework, but also a bit of cultural and philosophical framework as well, because that's often quite helpful. Actually, in meditation practice in general, having a clear view of one's own intents and how those line up with what you might call, maybe just call it like a healthy sense of what one is trying to cultivate, is maybe the best way of putting it. So as I mentioned, there's still this very strong tendency in the West to even turn things like meditation into projects of self-recreation or self-flagellation or something else of the sort. Whereas like one of the main terms, Sanskrit terms for meditation in general is that word bhavana, from which we get Maitri Bhavana. And bhavana really has more the sense of like just being, or it's a bit more active sense of cultivating. And the funny thing about cultivating, even if you want to take it in that more active sense, is not that you're trying to cultivate something, you're not trying to create something or fabricate something or to rip something out of you and get rid of it. It's rather that there's something there already, and it simply requires like a little bit of care, a little bit of attentiveness, a little bit of watering and sunlight and so forth, in order to actually take its natural course, that is to sprout, to grow and to flower. It's all quite organic in that sense. And Maitri practice is one of those practices which was taught actually quite frequently to a wide variety of people according to the Buddhist sutras. It's usually classified as like one of the 4 Brahma Viharas, or the 4 immeasurable practices, which included Maitri, Karuna. I always forget the third one in Sanskrit. That's sympathetic joy. Loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. And these were very frequently given out to monks and lay people in ancient times as ways of cultivating their intrinsic or basic goodness, I guess is a short way of putting it. Once again, in that spirit of like not having to do anything to themselves, but rather simply of, you might say, unblocking themselves, or taking care of themselves in a proper way, which was conducive to wisdom, conducive to virtue, aka natural flourishing, conducive to ultimately ending suffering for themselves and for others. And definitely in the more immediate term, a way of reducing the amount of suffering we inflict upon ourselves and by extension to others as well. So it was considered an important practice for a wide variety of reasons. And from a nerdy, scholarly, textualist sort of point of view, one of the root texts for this practice is this giant thing. I'm not sure if you see the title in reverse or not, but it's the Suttanipata Nikaya from the canon. It's about yay big. But the Metta Sutta, or Maitri Sutra, is actually quite short. It's only like a page or two, even though the practice pops up a lot in various other sutras. And the context, it's said, for the Buddha giving this practice in the ancient commentaries is that once upon a time, there was a large group of monks during the monsoon season with whom were looking for a place to practice during their downtime. And monsoon season in that part of India could last a very long time. So it was a really good time to just like sit down and practice for a lengthy period of time. And so the Buddha, who was still alive and still had the community at the time, is he sent them off to a small village of about 1,000 people near the border with Nepal. The village, whose name I can't remember offhand, is sort of out in the Uttar Pradesh area of India. And they went out there. It's a kind of a mountainous area, very beautiful, but a little bit wild. And the monks were trying to practice in the woods. And as the story goes, is that they were, at a certain point, they started like feeling afflicted by, all sorts of demons of fear. They were hearing things, seeing things, smelling things in the whole 9 yards. And after a few days of like trying to tough their way through it, the fear and the anxiety that they were feeling was just like too overwhelming. It was like their practice collapsed. And they went back to their local elder, and the local elder says, well, this is obviously a severe obstacle. We should just go back to the Buddha and we should ask for advice. And the Buddha, it is said, actually, after having like contemplated only for a brief period of time, considered that that was probably actually the best place for them to practice. And so he gave them a version of the Maitri practice to take with them back to the woods where they should practice with it. And in a sense, confront the so-called demons or so-called fears that they'd encountered there. And I've got a handy little translation here. It's better than the one in the large book because A, it's easier to hold, and B, it's translated more for lay people as opposed to monks. And so, and this sets rather well the context for how the practice is supposed to be understood and how to actually gradually, with time, extend it beyond simple formal meditation practice to sort of informal practice, which is daily life. And so here we go. I should probably drink some water first. This is what should be done by those who are skilled in seeking the good, having attained the way of peace. They should be able, straightforward, and upright, easy to speak to, gentle and not proud, content and easily supported, with few obligations and wants, with senses calmed, prudent, modest, and without greed for other people's possessions. They should not do anything base that the wise would approve. May they be at their ease and secure. May all beings be happy. Whatever living things there are, whether they be weak or strong, omitting none, whether long, large, average, short, big or small, seen or unseen, dwelling near or far, born or to be born, may all beings be happy. Let no one deceive another or despise anyone anywhere. Let none out of anger or hostility wish suffering upon another. Just as a mother would protect with her life her own child, her only child, so should one cultivate a boundless mind towards all beings and friendliness towards the entire world. One should cultivate a boundless mind, above, below, and across, without obstruction, hatred, or enmity. Standing, walking, sitting, or lying down throughout all one's waking hours, one should practice this mindfulness. This, they say, is the supreme state. Not falling into wrong views, virtuous, endowed with insight, having overcome desire for sin's pleasures, one will never know again rebirth. The Buddha Shakyamuni taught this Metta Sutra, which is found in the Sutta Nipata section of the Gundaka Nikaya collection of shorter length discourses. It was translated from the Pali by the Nalanda Translation Committee with reference to a number of previous translations. So that is the sutra, the translation, and the colophon. And so, but I find it quite interesting having reread this sutra for the, I don't know, umpteenth time, give or take a few. It's actually quite clear retrospectively that the Buddha teaches this from a perspective of really being content with what one is actually experiencing and with oneself as sort of preamble, which is interesting because that's sort of like the ground, but also the path and the fruition of the practice is actually, especially for us, getting to that state of actually just being content and friendly with ourselves actually is the starting point, but also the end point for us. And certainly for those monks who are basically wrestling with their own demons out in the woods, out in rural border Nepal, that was probably quite the case. And it was said that basically after having gone through this practice of actually working with Maitri over and over and over again in that kind of harrowing, deep rural context, eventually, they say in the story, the demons of the monks' imaginations or experience were sort of gradually transformed into devas, into luminous beings of one sort or another, which I think quite points to the fact that by actually extending some level of friendliness to our actual fears and anxieties, rather than either trying to oppose them or suppress them, we provide them with enough space, safety, and warmth to actually allow them to transform naturally. Now, I say that with its great caveat, of course, that one should always know that mindfulness and meditation and spirituality are not a substitute for actually sticking with one's own therapeutic resources. That is to say, either if you have a formal relationship with a doctor or a therapist, or taking any sort of medication, or dealing with any sort of or form of trauma, mindfulness practices, meditation practices can be helpful, but they are not an absolute substitute for actually proper medical supervision. And so by no means is anybody ever recommended to just drop their medication or drop seeing their therapist or their psychologist in order to just meditate every once in a while. Now, on the other hand, it might be very helpful to actually have a conversation with one's doctors or one's counselors about how to integrate meditation into one's sort of therapeutic path. I've certainly found that helpful. Many other people have found that helpful, but it's not always for everyone for one reason or another, and that's perfectly fine. So keeping that in mind, we can start talking about the practice proper after I've had some more water. Perhaps wet my nose as well. So in terms of the formalities of this practice, it was always very strongly recommended to start off with what we did actually, which is to do some sort of short or long spell of shamatha practice, some form of mindfulness in whatever tradition you're comfortable with. And that's simply to let us settle into our minds, settle into our bodies, settle into our experience. and hopefully just at least loosen up a little bit the sort of like make work project of the make Colin better or the make Colin different project, whatever we might be holding on to. And then gradually, since this is often classified as a contemplation practice, then get into our contemplation practice. In this case, contemplation of Maitri, of loving kindness. And it's a fairly simple practice, which will guide you through. And what we just remember is that whenever you're starting to hit something which is even slightly appearing to be like overwhelming, like emotionally overwhelming or physically overwhelming, and always paying attention to your body as well as your emotions, just drop it. Just drop the practice. Because that's actually not failure. Noticing that you're getting into a space where you're getting overwhelmed by something which is going on, that's being very precise and discerning and mindful. That's actually an achievement, right? A lot of people, we often have quite a hard time noticing that. And so noticing when you're getting even close to the border of where you're actually getting overwhelmed by your own thoughts or feelings, that's a great place to stop and just go back to doing something else, whether it's your shamatha, whether it's stretching your legs, having a cup of tea, whatever. Perfectly fine. And in fact, perfectly awesome. So, without further ado, it's like just get back to sort of like setting yourselves up with a comfortable but dignified posture. Something that brings to us that sense of being alive, dignified, that tender-hearted monarch sitting on their throne that we sometimes describe. That sense of welcoming. You can flash on that. After a few moments, just feel the body breathing. Breathing in a sense of welcome. And relaxing out in all directions with each out breath. Now we can recollect our intention to cultivate loving kindness. Cultivate our innate capacity to be friendly to ourselves and merciful to others. And we could light the spark of that by bringing it to mind now, with our eyes open or closed. The thought of somebody for whom we have like immediate, completely unobstructed friendliness and care for, warmth. Could be a parent, a friend, a mentor. Somebody you just highly respect who might not even have ever met, living or dead. Taking that sense of warmth, we extend it to ourselves. We can extend that warmth into every nook and cranny of our own beings, our own bodies, whatever cramps or pains we may have noticed in our shamatha practice. Unforced, allowing it to radiate as the sun radiates. There are clouds obstructing. That's okay. And you're simply radiating warmth of the clouds. And the mantra we can repeat to ourselves silently. May I be happy and enjoy happiness. Or may I enjoy happiness and the root of happiness. May I enjoy happiness and the root of happiness. Just radiating that sense of warmth to ourselves as we are in the present. Or if that's difficult, to ourselves in the past or in a distant future. We're old or young. May I enjoy happiness and the root of happiness. Now bringing to mind a dear friend or loved one. Repeating to yourself. May they enjoy happiness and the root of happiness. Now to relax out even further, bring to mind somebody whom we have no particular feelings, positive or negative, good or bad, somebody fairly neutral, somebody who had a passing encounter with a cashier, somebody on the street, whomever comes to mind. May they enjoy happiness and the root of happiness. Now we can extend ourselves out a little bit more. Bring to mind somebody we find perhaps a little bit irksome, a little bit annoying, or somebody who recently irked or annoyed us. Nothing too challenging. So may they enjoy happiness and the root of happiness. May they enjoy happiness and the root of happiness. Now we can try to bring to mind all those people we've imagined so far, the great benefactor, ourselves, a loved one, a neutral person, a really irking person all together with us. May we all enjoy happiness and the root of happiness. Extend that outwards to everyone here now doing this practice, everyone in our environment. May we all enjoy happiness and the root of happiness. Extending that out as far as you wish or able, without judgment of yourself and your performance. Just radiating out as many beings as we can. May all beings enjoy happiness and the root of happiness. Now we can return to shamatha for a few moments, just resting with whatever we're experiencing. Recollecting that we're alive, that we're here, and resting with the feeling of the body breathing. Now we can slowly rouse ourselves out of our practice, stretch, move about. Maintaining, I think, a sense of noble pride in the fact that we've just done something which is, not that bad. We're cultivating something quite good, quite refreshing, a bit challenging too. If I have any particular closing comments, it's some like very practical issues. So for anybody who's not really experienced doing these sorts of practices, as I mentioned before, it's usually very, very good practice if you're going to, in terms of like formal, sitting or standing or walking practice, to start with like some level of mindfulness or shamatha practice before going into a contemplative practice like Maitri or loving kindness practice, and then sort of like sandwich it with like another layer of shamatha practice at the end. We sort of did all that fairly quickly, but personally, if I was doing it, I would take at least 10 minutes to do shamatha at the beginning, and the contemplative practice for about 15 minutes in the middle, and then trying to get another 10 minutes at the end of shamatha. You'll oftentimes end up going longer than that because I'm so relaxed after doing a practice like that. It's like I just like want to stay there for a while and sort of luxuriate in whatever's come up, or at least let whatever's percolate to the surface sort of have its time to, do its thing, basically. We don't have to be too hard about time. It's just sort of like a general guideline or general recommendation, but one should really keep track of one's own speed. Some days we just like want to luxuriate more or rest more in the shamatha. Other times we're a little bit more rushed for some reason. It's all perfectly fine, right? You just go along with one's own rhythms. Yeah, as I mentioned, all these practices are more, I'm sure it's more complicated. It's not quite the right word, but they're never quite as simple as they seem. Speaking as somebody who's been working with both shamatha practice and like compassion and Maitri practice for many years, is like you always somehow end up finding a new layer to these things. So they're worth working with on a regular basis for as long as you're doing any sort of meditation practice, really. And definitely if one wants to like try them out for a while, general rule of thumb is like try it out for 2 weeks and see how it works for you. Sort of like trying out a new car. If the cylinders fall out, feel free to return it to the lot. That's my advice. But trying it out on a regular basis, like once a day, like at least a brief spell for a couple of weeks, will at least give you a taste or a sense of whether or not it's working for you, or whether there's something that's a little bit off, and then you might want to talk to somebody, like a meditation instructor or somebody else of the sort. Other than that, I've got nothing else planned in terms of my own, rambling. Anybody else want to ramble for a while? I'm seeing no victims. At least nobody wants to be on camera. So I'll take a moment here, and I'll just say thank you, and see you again soon to everybody who was on the live stream. And we will be meeting again, I believe, on April 7th. I personally won't be here because it's my birthday, and my wife tells me she has dibs. But I'll probably be back in a couple of weeks after that. And so with that, I'm just going to turn off the live stream and say toodaloo.